again. Um, we are back looking at the Earth, and in this video in particular, the question here will be, what is a creation myth? And I want to talk about this, the psychological implications for start. When you hear a story, and the story is told specifically to be myth, you kind of automatically imply that it's not something that you would take seriously, right? I mean, that's kind of how I take it. So I almost see that as a slander in a way. I don't think people understand that, but so supposedly there's a bunch of stories from around the world that actually speak of a time before the moon. Suppose there's reoccurring themes, and suppose there's actual physical features on the Earth that appear to exhibit distinct signs of a catastrophic event with an object relative in proportion to the size of the moon, where there was an electromagnetic reaction that occurred, possibly even a secondary reaction that occurred with the need to balance two larger potentials. Anyway, so automatically dismiss those stories as myths. Ignore this giant spot on the Earth. But if somebody tells you a story about how the universe was created long, long ago from a single point, and then they keep saying, like, this article says there's no empirical evidence that contradicts the Big Bang Theory. Geez, wow. That's pretty deep right there. Because this guy, Halton Arp, was, I mean, this is nothing new, but he was explaining how they were misinterpreting redshift, like, long ago. And they still teach the Big Bang Theory to people like it's, like, listen, this is how people actually think. Yes, it is not possible that the Big Bang Theory is incorrect. Like, they won't even admit that there's a chance that it's wrong. Which is pretty disturbing. I think this gets into psychological aspects, which is why we got to talk Velikovsky here, because people just don't want to admit the fact that we don't know something. And when you look at our observations, they say it's like this happened some 13 billion years ago or whatever, and we can look out into space 13 billion light years in all directions. It kind of like, that puts us back at the center of the universe. Like, we haven't changed from that heliocentric mentality. But people openly accept this as science, even though there's no real proof for it. So, like, the major proof for it is the misinterpretation of redshift that they don't want to admit could possibly be wrong. And then you also have the electromagnetic background radiation that they don't want to admit is the electromagnetic force in space. It gets pretty deep. And then they start talking about space-time, but don't even explain. Like, they act like this stuff is not known, even though, like, Einstein postulated that gravity bends the geometry of space-time. Wow. But they don't talk about when Velikovsky proved Einstein wrong about the electromagnetic force in Jupiter emitting radio signals or anything like that. I think I originally got to this. I was looking for Immanuel Velikovsky's Cosmos Without Gravitation, and then just got sidetracked on this. But people openly accept this as if it were a fact, kind of like evolution. It's not really proven true. Like, they say this background radiation is evidence of the Big Bang, but then they don't want to admit that this is evidence of the electromagnetic force. They want to act like that can't happen in space. This has to be an explosion from a time that defies all known physics. Gets a little frustrating, but people love this theory, I guess, and they made a show about it, so people love it even more. To me, this is the ultimate mockery, though, because they dismiss all the creation stories as if they were myth, and then they take this unprovable tale, like you can't prove that this happened, and then it defies all known laws of physics. It is a physical theory. But it explains the evolution of the observable universe from the earliest known periods that we don't even know. Proof. They act like there's proof. So I'm just going to dismiss that. This guy's worth looking into. There's a few other people that talk about it. There is evidence against it, but I think it's the genuine point that is often overlooked. They teach people this. It's widely accepted. They act like this is what all the scientists believe. Or the whichever special science. Like, you can't question this, otherwise you're not a scientist. That's why it's like, it's not possible. So, there's a lot of back and forth, but really, these people have never proven it. That's the point. Like, there's no proof of this at all. And they don't even want it to be questioned. I don't want to know what he has to say. But so what is a myth is the question. If we say the Earth used to have a supercontinent named Pangea or whatever, where all the landmass is situated in one, is that a myth? Is that a hypothesis? Is it a theory? Do we not know? Do we have clues? How many? Can we verify it? Possibly not, maybe not, who knows. It's probably a theory, so we'll just base it on that. But it, Here's another myth. Formation and evolution of the solar system. So they make up a story and they'll tell you, and they'll teach it to kids billions of years ago. Got to be based on gravity. We can't talk about the electromagnetic force in this equation. So they teach creation myths as though they were science. They just call them theory. But if somebody explains an alternative theory or a different point of view about the early times, those get dismissed as myth if they fall outside of the standard theory. This is like almost Nazi level for somebody who's actually aware. It gets torturous at times. So I think people really don't understand this one enough. And they don't want to know, unfortunately. But we're gonna have to talk about a few other myths, because if I say something like this was tidally locked, which actually makes sense when you consider about the land to water distribution and how common tidal locking is, that actually opens up a lot. But if you consider that, then you have to talk about whether or not our moon was around, because if we didn't have a moon when we were tidally locked like this, then technically we didn't have day or night. And then, if you have stories about that, and then you have stories about a time before the moon, and then you have more tales about how it happened, kind of descriptive to what one might expect a scenario, and you didn't really expect to see it when you first became aware of the scars, and then you see like entire mountain ranges were formed, like rocks pulled out of the ground. These aren't megaliths. These are granite tors somewhere up in Alaska. And you can see the scale of the scars and the necessity to redistribute charge across the surface of the planet, all back to this spot that indicates not a kinetic impact with the moon. Actually, it prevented the moon from a kinetic impact, but I think we tidally locked the moon in an instant, or darn near. But if I tell you a story about that, that would be a creation myth, right? That wouldn't be a would that be a hypothesis if I base it on like actual, because tidal locking occurs in so many different satellites, it's very, very common. You could consider something like a brown dwarf star, which is not that far off from Jupiter, or red dwarf star. We could talk about that and why something like that applied to a tidally locked Earth, what all that entails. We have 4 gas giants to choose from, and a sun. So, if we have stories about, and we have scars on the Earth, but those are creation myths, right? Just another way to think of it, I guess. I guess we'll talk more later, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.